It was said that the Inquisition hunted not only heresy, but fear itself, and in that pursuit, it forged devices so cruel they seemed to come from hell, not heaven. Among them was one creation whispered about even by the torturers themselves, the iron spider. Unlike the rack or the wheel, this instrument wasn't built for swift execution. Its purpose was pain, slow, deliberate, precise. The iron spider didn't break bones. It peeled away humanity, one scream at a time. It was a deceptively simple device. From metal claws, curved like a spider's legs, attached to a handle or mounted on a frame. Each claw ended in sharpened hooks, designed to pierce and pull. In some versions, it was heated until the steel glowed red. In others, it was cold and rusted, a reminder of countless victims before. The spider wasn't made to kill. It was made to extract. Accused heretics, men, women, even children, were dragged into the interrogation chamber, their confessions already written, waiting only for a trembling signature. But first, the inquisitors would show them the device. They believed that pain could cleanse the soul, that the body's destruction was justified if it saved the spirit from eternal damnation. The prisoner was stripped bare, bound to a post or laid upon a table. Two inquisitors held them steady while a third brought forward the spider. The claws were placed against soft flesh, arms, thighs, chest, or, most often, the breasts of women accused of witchcraft. The first pull tore skin, the second exposed muscle, and by the third, the body was no longer a body. It was a confession waiting to happen. Witnesses described the torture chamber as silent except for the sound of tearing flesh and the hiss of hot metal. The victims rarely screamed for long. Their voices broke, their throats filled with blood. Sometimes, the inquisitors prayed while they worked, whispering Latin hymns as they burned and tore their victims. In their minds, they weren't murderers. They were purifiers. In the archives of the Spanish Inquisition, there are records that hint at its use. One entry from 1574 describes a mechanism of claws heated for the extraction of confession. Another, from 1602, simply calls it la hora de hero, the iron spider. It was used not only in Spain, but in parts of France, Italy, and Germany. Anywhere the Inquisition extended its reach, sometimes it was attached to a wall, with the claws fixed in place while the victim was dragged backward, tearing their own flesh apart. Other times, it was handheld, a weapon of personal cruelty. The inquisitor could decide how deep to cut, how long to hold the heat, how much blood was enough before the soul was cleansed. Many of the accused were innocent, people denounced out of envy, suspicion, or fear. A whispered rumor could bring death, a missed prayer, a strange dream, a disagreement with a priest. Any of it could be called heresy. And once accused, there was no escape. The chambers were built of stone, thick, damp, and soundproof. Candles flickered against walls blackened by centuries of smoke. Chains hung from hooks. Buckets of water stood ready to extinguish the iron's heat between sessions. Some victims fainted after the first touch of the spider. Others tried to fight, kicking, twisting, until the restraints cut their wrists raw. The interrogators took pride in precision. They called it measured mercy. The spider wasn't meant to kill too quickly. Death was failure. The true art was to keep the victim alive, conscious, aware, long enough to surrender everything they knew or didn't know. Many confessed to anything: witchcraft, sorcery, conspiracies against the church. Simply to end it, they would name friends, neighbors, even family members. The Inquisition thrived on those names. Each confession became the spark for another arrest, another interrogation, another scream. There are accounts of women who, after surviving the iron spider, were paraded through the streets, their wounds bound with cloth, their heads shaved, symbols of repentance. They had confessed, so the church showed them mercy, exile instead of execution. But mercy, in those days, meant a life destroyed, a body broken beyond healing. Others were not so fortunate. When a confession wasn't enough, the spider returned. this time to finish the work. The claws would tear through deeper muscle, sometimes exposing ribs or spine. Heated versions cauterized the wounds instantly, leaving blackened marks that stayed even in death. For the inquisitors, those scars were proof that the soul had been purified. For the victims, they were the evidence of hell brought to earth. In some variations, the iron spider was combined with other tortures: the rack, the strap auto, the water method. The prisoner might be stretched until their joints dislocated, then clawed across the chest with a spider, then revived with cold water to repeat the process. It wasn't chaos, it was procedure. Every act was recorded, approved, and blessed by men who believed they were serving God. The irony was unholy. The church that preached compassion, forgiveness, and salvation became a machine of fear, and the iron spider was one of its tools. A reminder that belief, when twisted by power, can turn faith into fire and mercy into mutilation. The most chilling detail isn't the device itself, it's the calmness of those who used it. Inquisition records show no anger, no passion, only formality. The accused resisted, the instrument was applied, confession was obtained. Each line reads like a surgeon's report, devoid of horror, devoid of humanity. They didn't see it as cruelty. They saw it as order. And that's what makes it terrifying. The spider didn't need to exist in thousands of forms. Only a few were enough to break nations into obedience. The mere rumor of it could silence entire communities. Parents warned their children, never speak against the church. Travelers whispered about it in taverns, afraid even to name it. And still, beneath the surface of devotion, fear spread like wildfire. Every sermon, every confession, every whispered prayer carried the weight of the iron spider, unseen, but always waiting. The victims of the Inquisition are countless, many lost to time, their names erased by the very church that condemned them. But their screams echo still, not in sound, but in history. When the Inquisition finally began to crumble under the weight of its own cruelty, the iron spider disappeared, not destroyed, but hidden. Records were burned, tools buried in monasteries' cellars, and those who had once turned the handles and held the claws quietly reassigned, or retired into silence. Yet even centuries later, a few of these instruments were found, rusted, twisted, and unmistakably human in their design. One was discovered in a sealed chamber beneath a former tribunal hall in Toledo, Spain. The room was damp and airless, its stone walls blackened with smoke. Among the chains and manacles lay a small iron device. Its claws curved inward like a spider ready to strike. The steel had corroded, but traces of dark stains marked its edges. Those who uncovered it refused to touch it barehanded. They said it felt as though the metal still remembered. By the 18th century, when Europe was beginning to embrace reason and enlightenment, whispers of these devices returned to the surface, relics of an age that had traded knowledge for. Controlled scholars and travelers wrote about them with horror and fascination. Some doubted their existence, calling them exaggerations of anti-clerical propaganda. But others had seen them, locked away in the archives of inquisitorial cities, labeled only with a single word, Instrumentum Confessionis. Even after the Inquisition officially ended, the shadow it cast remained. In parts of Italy and Spain, villagers would tell their children not to wander near old monasteries after dark. They said you could still hear the scraping of metal against stone, or the faint sound of a prayer breaking into a scream. Superstition? Perhaps. But history has a way of haunting the places that tried to silence it. The iron spider was more than a tool of pain. It was a symbol of how faith can be twisted by fear, of how morality can be weaponized, and how easily a belief in salvation can justify the destruction of life. For centuries, people lived under the illusion that torture purified the soul, that suffering could lead to truth, and the church, powerful and unquestioned, held the keys to both. But every empire of cruelty eventually collapses, and when it does, the truth surfaces like a ghost. Documents uncovered in the 19th century revealed just how systematic the torture had been. Victims weren't random, they were chosen. The inquisitors targeted scholars, healers, midwives, and those who dared question authority. The iron spider, like other tools of the time, was reserved for the unrepentant, those who refused to break. One account tells of a woman from Aragon, accused of communion with spirits. She refused to confess despite 3 rounds of interrogation. When they used the spider, she bit her own tongue off to avoid speaking. Her silence was written in the record as defiance until death. Another man, a scholar from Naples, confessed only after the iron claws reached his abdomen. His final words, recorded by a scribe, were, "If God watches, then he must weep." Those words never left the pages. They were sealed in the archives for more than 200 years. When the archives were open, historians described feeling sick as they read the testimony. Each confession, each entry, each successful interrogation told the same story of men using faith as a shield to hide their inhumanity. The Church, centuries later, would call these acts errors of zeal. But there is no zeal pure enough to justify tearing a body apart in the name of love. As time passed, the iron spider became a symbol in museums, a dark exhibit behind glass, standing as a warning to future generations. But behind the steel and history lies something deeper, the reminder that civilization often wears the mask of morality while hiding its monsters behind it. Inquisitors believed that pain revealed truth. Yet the only truth the spider ever revealed was how easily power corrupts the sacred. Imagine the silence of those chambers, the echo of iron scraping over stone, the faint drip of candle wax, the smell of burnt flesh blending with incense. Each sound, each breath, each cry that was swallowed by the walls became part of the foundation of European fear. People obeyed not because they believed, but because they were terrified to doubt. And that is the real horror of the iron spider, not the blood it spilled, but the silence it created. Centuries later, when those same lands built cathedrals of learning and science, when the Enlightenment spoke of reason and liberty, the ghosts of those tortured still lingered in the architecture. Invisible, but present, you can walk through old cathedrals today and feel it, that subtle heaviness, the cold stillness, as if history refuses to let you forget. Because these weren't isolated acts of madness. They were part of a system, a world where truth was decided not by reason, but by pain. And if there's one thing history teaches, it's that the instruments may change, but the idea behind them survives. Whenever fear replaces understanding, whenever power disguises itself as righteousness, the spirit of the iron spider is reborn in new forms under new names. So when you look back at the iron spider, at those jagged claws once justified by Scripture, remember that the most terrifying tortures are not the ones we can see. They are the ones built inside belief itself. If this story disturbed you, it should. Because history isn't just a collection of dates, it's a mirror. And sometimes, when we stare too long into it, we see our own reflection staring back. If you want to uncover more of the dark truths the world tried to erase, the forgotten tortures, the silenced victims, the stories buried beneath centuries of faith and fear, follow Torture's Room. Because the past still bleeds through time, and some screams never fade.